Is God's love reckless? That's a question that at times has made its way around various Christian communities that I've been a part of. And sometimes it's connected to a song. Sometimes it's connected to a sermon. Sometimes it's connected to just a devotion. But I think it is an important question to ask. Is God's love reckless? It's important to ask, but it's even more important to make sure we know what we are asking. A lot of times whenever I'm talking to people about the word reckless, and I just simply ask, what do you mean by the word reckless? They struggle to define it clearly. They'll say something like, well, it's just like you just kind of are doing whatever. Or, it's kind of like you break rules and you break laws and I'm going, okay. Well, let's do this. Let's ask two questions. First of all, let's ask the definition of reckless. What is it? When you look it up, reckless can carry a connotation, a derivative definition of careless. But it also carries the definition of doing an action without regard for the harm that could incur. Now, you could say the harm that could incur on the people that are around you, or the harm that could incur on yourself. There is a recklessness to the way in which some people drive that can hurt the people around them. There is a recklessness to the way in which a hero runs into a burning building in order to save the very last people that are inside. Without regard for their own safety, they charge straight into the battle. Recklessness, first of all, we need to define it and ask the question whether or not we see that characteristic in God. The second question we need to ask about recklessness is this: reckless from whom's perspective? From our perspective? From God's perspective? Like, it's one thing if we're asking the question, does God violate his own laws that he lays down? Like, if that's the assumption behind the rejection of the concept of recklessness, then I understand the concern. Now, if we know anything about sovereignty, I think that one of the things we should do is to stop and say, and yet maybe it's that we understood the law a little different than God did. For example, circumcision. It even says in Genesis 17 that circumcision will be forever, a sign of the covenant, eternal sign of the covenant forever. And in Acts 15, they're going, meh, maybe we don't need circumcision anymore. So maybe it is this binding law from our perspective, but from God's it isn't. The second is this, though. Is it reckless from our perspective the way in which we perceive God's love? And if that's the case, then maybe it isn't reckless at all, but it goes by a logic or by a nature that that is foreign to us, but isn't actually careless. This is what I'm saying. Really what I'm reflecting on is 1 Corinthians 1. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 18. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. You catch that? It doesn't just say it's foolishness in general. It says it's foolishness, but from whom's perspective? Well, from those that are actually perishing. For those that don't belong to God, yes, the cross is quite foolish. It says, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For those of us that are being saved, the cross isn't foolishness. It is the very power of God, the pursuit of God for broken humanity. And then it goes on, it says this, for it is written, I would destroy the wisdom of the wise. The intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. There's a part of this at a certain point where I would say, okay, let's just act like we are able to pinpoint God's recklessness. And here's my response back. But does your perspective actually take into account that the foolishness of God is actually far more exultant than the wisest thought of the most intelligent person? There's a part of this where the internal nature of God, the internal logic of his character, is something that at times does strike us quite foreign. But what I do find in God throughout the scriptures is not just an intellect that far exceeds ours, like 1 Corinthians 1, 25. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. There's a part of it where I begin to celebrate the fact that I don't understand God's movement. I look at the way in which God created everything when he did not need us. And there's a part of me that says, wow, that was borderline reckless because of what we did in Genesis 3. And you know what? After Genesis 3, when we messed everything up, God could have scrapped everything. But I look at what he does is he recklessly pursues us by coming to Abraham, by going to Moses, by giving us the law, by sending us the prophets, by putting us into exile, and then by bringing us back. And then he recklessly becomes flesh and becomes obedient to the hands of the very creatures that he has created, becomes obedient to even death, and even allows us to crucify him, only to resurrect, and then to send the Spirit into our hearts. I find it quite reckless that God has actually entrusted the incredible gospel itself to me, to you, to us, broken humanity, to carry on the legacy, to carry on the mission and the message of Jesus Christ. And yet, in all of this recklessness, I can't help but stop and praise him. Number one, because I don't get it. And because number two, what I term as recklessness, God terms his infinite love. What I label foolish, he labels grace. What I label careless, he labels divine intimacy. You see, from my perspective, it may look as if God is reckless. But if he is reckless about anything, it's more along the lines of him running into a burning building than it is him driving on a road without care or concern for anyone around him. God does not seem to be concerned with protecting himself. That is true. And if that's what it is that we're willing to describe as reckless, then let's say that it is. But what I do find is a God that seems to break down every boundary, every barrier that either we conjure or that we perceive. Why? To get to us. Whether or not God is truly reckless or not, from my perspective or from his, frankly, I don't care. What causes me to move to worship is that he is in zealous pursuit of me, of you. And for that, while the world may call it foolishness, I will call it grace. Love you guys. Talk to you next week.